Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. Who's your chills, deaths, like swords, and vassals, minions. And that goes for you too in China. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about China. And this is particularly relevant in the context of events we see unfolding in Hong Kong right now. And the basic idea of this video is that China talks and thinks about a new world order as well. It's not just the elites in the West. And in fact, one of my basic arguments is that the elites around the world have more in common with each other than the peoples of the globe as a class, and therefore they share a lot of interests and a lot of aims, a lot of strategies, and a lot of end games. In this case, a new world order. But of course, with the Western idea of a new world order is a global corporate governance format, where the Chinese model still has a core that has a government that still has some power, whereas in the West, corporations pretty much run all the governments. And the reason why this is relevant with events that are unfolding in Hong Kong, of course, is because Hong Kong is not as important as an economic hub for the Chinese in some respects, because Shanghai has been their focus, and that's been confirmed by the Shanghai Free Trade Zone Agreement and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and all of these major developments for Chinese forays into the economic global situation. They use these vehicles, and they're based out of Shanghai, so they built this up. So the idea of continuing to have Hong Kong as a semi-autonomous region with more democracy no longer makes sense for the mainland, and certainly from their perspective, I grip what their view is. Of course, that's not wearing well with the Western instigated and supported coup, or not coup, but student protests or Hong Kong protests, democratic protests, as they're being colored now. This is all doesn't really have that much to do with the mainland. And the issues that Chinese have in Hong Kong are definitely not the same issues that we have on mainland China. So anyway, let's get back to the main focus of this video, and that's the idea of this so-called New World Order. And I tend to use the term global world governance when I talk about the New World Order concepts used in the West. And we've heard that term bantered around by everybody from Obama to George Bush Sr. to and going back to Hitler and countless other figures. And so this is a term that's very loaded. Everybody knows what it means, sort of. And it's come to embrace a whole number of things and sort of depicted in dystopian novels like Brave New World in 1984. That tends to be what people view a new world order as. But the nuances, because it exists in the higher echelons of the financial worlds, these nuances are lost because of the fact that the new world order is so loaded that people expect a more nightmarish vision, and the fact that it will have a friendly face definitely keeps people from seeing the reality that essentially corporate global governance is already here. The New World Order is already here, and that's been confirmed by Dr. Kissinger. So anyway, there was a report that came out fairly recently, or an editorial, but it's by a state-run paper, so it's essentially an official Chinese message. And they are talking about the de-Americanizing of the world, and that's their vision of the New World Order. And so, in other words, the Western U.S. vision of a new world order, of course, is U.S. corporations and the U.S. military running a global empire encompassing the globe. whereas the Chinese model is the very antithesis of that, of anything but the Americans running the entire picture. And George Gu goes on to say, in China and the New World Order, quote, "One thing is clear. Developed nations and the late developers are more than ever in the same boat. Hence, creating a new world order is apparently needed. Only with a new world order can we hope to enter a brave new era and gain broader benefits for all," unquote. Sounds like the same kind of jargon that we hear from the same crowd in the West as far as politicians. But interestingly enough, even quoting using partial quote of brave new era instead of brave new world. So almost referencing the dystopian novels that depict a nightmarish new world order. And then he goes on to say, quote, "China is not the only nation that is embracing global development. The quick advancement of so many late developers will inevitably have vast effects on global life. One reasonable conclusion may be this: a new world order will emerge gradually and most likely indirectly, simply because a fast expanding pie creates vast opportunities for all parties." Very interestingly put, and confirming what I observe, which is this new world order will gradually emerge. By the time people really notice that a lot of this stuff is in place, which is happening as we speak, that it's already done. And I find it interesting. They say it comes about indirectly as well, and that's another part of this, is that the parts of the New World Order develop just because the trajectory and the narrative is already there, and a lot of events fill in to make the whole work. So anyway, now let's go to another report that's even all the more interesting, because it outlines specifically what a Chinese New World Order vision is like. It's a 2011 report called, quote, "China's Vision of International Order in an Era of U.S. Decline," unquote. And this is fascinating. China, basically their policy is China accommodates the U.S. while pursuing a strategy of delegitimization of U.S. power. And that's what we see a lot, all this talk about the reserve currency and building up their gold reserves, and basically using the international bully pulpit to talk about the Chinese worldview and how the United States represents the global threat, which is something we also hear from Russia, of course, and certainly a fair amount of truth to that. So how do they do this? They denounce U.S. unilateralism. So that's one thing China and Russia have in common, is condemning the tendency for U.S. to act in spite of any international pressure whatsoever, and acting alone. So their New World Order doesn't include that. Number two is creation of new international organizations. And I already touched on that already. They're already trying to bypass a lot of organizations, including financial institutions that the Chinese have had to go through, and creating their own free trade zones, and creating the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Creating this new World Development Bank. This is all international organizations to circumvent American unilateralism. Number three, soft power in the developing world. And this is something I've discussed in previous videos, and has been discussed ad nauseum in plenty of places, and that's the idea that the Chinese go in and they work with countries, for example, in Africa, and they help build up their infrastructure and supply a certain amount of manpower, and actually contribute something to the economy, whereas the Western powers in the United States tend to just sell weapons and exploit resources for weapons and military intervention to a certain degree by Western powers, including the United States. Number four, voting against the U.S. in international arenas. And of course, we've seen a long history of that, with both China and Russia being the only countries that ever tend to vote against whatever the United States wants, although they had some ups and downs in that tendency, depending on how world opinion is about feels about the United States at any given moment. And then number 5, setting the agenda in international and regional organizations. And that's where the Chinese use their influence to try and set the agenda and bring up issues, and issues, of course, that interact with this whole idea of delegitimizing U.S. power and denouncing their U.S. unilateralism. And interestingly enough, just like the West, Chinese strategists about a new world order have 3 basic visions. One is a new Chinese new world order dominated by the Chinese instead of the United States. Number 2 is a modified liberal order, and that's what I see emerging, and that's why I think the new world order will be modeled after the Chinese model, not the United States or Western model, eventually being the modified liberal new world order, where the United States and China can come together in a liberal new world order. Sorry for all the conservatives out there, but they are going to be a liberal new world order. And number 3 is a negotiated order, where there's some sort of agreement set up where everybody agrees somehow to interconnect in a civil way, creating a new world order that just everyone agrees on. And we could see a combination of all 3 of those as well. So let's talk about this modified liberal order idea a little bit. It's working within the existing global system and structured around capitalism and democracy. So interesting to hear this idea coming from scholars in China and statesmen considering a new world order. And they think maybe the capitalism and democracy. And that makes it all the more likely that this whole idea of a new world order dominated by Chinese ideas could very well happen, particularly if capitalism and democracy continues to increase in China somehow and seems to be decreasing in the United States and West. And an international order dominated by the powerful states. So that's another thing about the modified liberal order that's interesting. All the powerful states, instead of confronting each other to be the last man standing, instead will be an international order dominated by several powerful states. But of course, that's definitely against the United States vision of what a new world order would look like. And then we have the negotiated order, and that's one where, quote, it supports a hedging strategy of avoiding direct confrontation with the U.S., but preparing favorable conditions for China to shape an emerging world order in the long term. That's where it's easy to see that overlap with the modified liberal order as well, supporting a hedging strategy with, and we've seen this already. The Chinese have been not very confrontational, all things considered, and carefully been working with the United States, although furthering their own agenda like all nations do. And they're willing to be patient and shape, have input and shape an emerging world order in the long term. And that also fits into my view that in the long term, we could see developments in China where it becomes more and more obvious that they are the model for the future new world order, much more so perhaps than the United States. Especially now as they become the #1 economy on the planet. As of last week, I believe, or speculation that they are almost there. And then the idea that the transition going on in China now is to try and create a consumer culture, and if they're successful, then certainly all the corporations in the world, this will be their cash cow for many decades to come. And then we have the new Chinese order vision, which is very interesting because not only do they want to integrate, well, let's just go down the numbers. Number 1, they want to use Chinese traditional philosophy as a framework for dealing with world problems. So that's certainly something I'd like to explore more and find out more about. I assume it means Buddhist and Confucius ideals. U.S. had number two, yes, U.S. hegemony to lose international legitimacy. Of course, that's part of all of their visions of the New World Order. Number three, Chinese political and economic systems as a better model for the world. Very interesting. So they see it as I do, that Chinese political and economic systems as a better model for the New World Order than the United States model, and they could very well be right. Certainly there's many who agree, and I'll talk about someone who does in a moment. And number four, China to build a global harmony through social welfare and collective goods. So the idea that they would create a New World Order where human values would dominate more. And of course, that's what the United States says about what we do, but somehow I don't see any problem with maybe giving them a crack at it, running a world based on social welfare and collective goods. Of course, that once again, that goes back to the whole idea of a global liberal New World Order, and some may chafe at that. And so anyway, somebody who does support this idea is George Soros, of course. In 2009, George Soros, in an interview with Financial Times, said that China will supplant the U.S. as leader of the New World Order, and that America should not resist the country's decline as the dollar weakens, living standards drop, and a new global currency is introduced. Soros was quoted to say, quote, "I think you need a new world order that China has to be a part of the process of creating, and they have to own it in the same way as the U.S. owns the current order." So very, very interesting statement from George Soros, and one of the reasons why I think the blueprint for the New World Order has a lot more to do with China than the United States, or certainly something in between the two. But he even says that they will have to own it the same way the U.S. owns the new one. So should the United States decline and China somehow commandeer a global New World Order, then they will have to run it with some authority in order to compete with the U.S. model that we've seen so far. And that certainly makes sense. And once you think about it, when you talk about the United States vision of a new world order and a global world governance, and the large amount of construction that's gone on to create it thus far, it's been very successful, and there's a lot of concentration of power in financial circles and transnationals. But when you look at the entire globe and the overall geography and how many countries and how many square miles, you have to say that the countries and land involved in the collective Chinese and Russian sphere concept of a new world order covers a lot of ground. A good example of that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it's a collective security treaty organization somewhat akin to NATO. And right now, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan are all part of it. And then, of course, we know Russia has new agreements with Belarus and the like. And there's discussions of maybe India, Pakistan, and Iran getting involved. And then we have the BRICS as well that involves Brazil. So when you line up all those countries, it's a pretty formidable balance to their construction of their New World Order. So theoretically, China is well placed, and some combination of Russia and China perhaps running some sort of vision of their New World Order, depending on how things turn out. And then, of course, the New World Order vision, whether it's China, Russia, or the West, all have the same nemesis of radical Islamist terrorism. And so that's an interesting component that unites the globe right now. So perhaps part of this strategy is not only global world governance, but this global military cooperation in order to go after the ultimate boogeyman that we have now. And this is Islamist extremism that seemingly all countries are dealing with to some way or another. So So anyway, and then we have, of course, the Eurozone, China, are discussing a free trade agreement, and so that's could also sway Europe basically to hedge their bets, perhaps joining the Chinese version of the New World Order. Why not? They have all those social welfare programs in Eurozone that are collapsing, so perhaps they have more in common with China. And like I said, we have the Shanghai Free Trade Zone Agreement, the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the BRICS World Development Bank, and so a lot of cooperation there, constructing their own vision of a new world order. So there we have it. Before I sign out, I want to give a hat tip to the legendary Deb Truth, who pointed me in this direction and provided me with some of the research and great inspiration. So anyway, there we have it. The big kingpins in the West and some of these puppets in the White House and some of these dictators around the world throughout history that have talked about the New World Order certainly aren't the only ones. Turns out the Chinese have their idea of the New World Order too. And I think theirs is going to be the blueprint for what we will come to see as global world governance. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.